Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to What Happens Next, the show dedicated to exploring the nuanced changes that happen in our lives in our 50s and 60s and beyond. I'm Chris. I'm a chartered financial planner and I've run my own practice for 15 years now. And a lot of my clients are at the stage in their life where they want to make positive changes. But that idea of just retirement, stopping work forever and not doing anything, just relaxing, doesn't sound particularly appealing. So on What Happens Next, we explore the life you could potentially live and ideas and concepts that are going to help you make positive change from where you are now to where you want to be. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Gina. Gina, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So am I, 100%. Now, interestingly, we talked about illness before we came on. Yes. And that element of getting the balance right between carrying on regardless and actually stopping. Mm-hmm. I suppose my first question is, how do you know?
Well, I'm probably the last person to ask that question, if I'm really honest. I'm much better at it than I was. The situation previously was that focusing on something that I was really interested in meant that I completely switched the body off, and that was really great pain control. It was really helpful pain control, but it wasn't actually very good for my health. So I took it to an art form. Yeah. Interestingly, I was on a course, and this is when I was in my 50s, when I stopped being a head teacher and working 18 hours a day. And we were looking at values. And somebody pointed out to me that health was not one of my top 10 values. In fact, it didn't feature on my value list at all.
Really interesting. You know what? I think we often come to a realization, and I certainly see this with my clients, and I probably came to this realization in my late 30s, early 40s, so a little bit earlier than a lot of my clients, that health is wealth, right? So actually focusing on that element of, we've got clients who have built good businesses and, built wealth in a conventional sense, financial wealth, but have probably neglected the bit that's going to give them the longevity and the physical ability to live life to the max. It's so interesting. Tell us a bit about you then, Gina. You've sort of alluded a little bit to your story, but for those of our watchers and listeners who don't know, tell us a bit about your story.
So I started off life as a teacher and found I was very good at it, and then was promoted very early. So I became the deputy head teacher of a large school at the age of 28, and I was appointed to be the catalyst for change. It was a good school. It was in Romford. However, it was very much in the dark ages. Spent the first 6 months working with the head teacher, lovely man, John Hughes, strategically planning how we were going to move forward, and then went skiing in the February half term. Very keen skier. But in those days, it was the fashion to have skis as long as possible. And I'd bought a new pair of skis at Christmas that were 10 centimeters longer than I was used to.
Okay.
We went to St Anton in I can't remember if it's Italy or Austria, but anyway, went to St Anton, which is a really challenging ski resort. And I proceeded to wrap that extra 10 centimeters around my neck fairly often. And on the Thursday, I had a really bad fall. And so on the Friday, I said to my friends, look, I'm going to go and get my confidence back. I'm going to go, there's a nice run, and they said, meet us for lunch, which I did. They said, we found this fabulous new run, 6 kilometers, red run. And so I agreed to join them. Beautiful day, sun shining, went up on the chairlift. You know, one of those days when the mountains are glistening, and it just looked fabulous. Off we went, turned a corner. It was pretty evident that they weren't where they were supposed to be. So instead of this amazing 6 kilometer red run, we were on the top of a black diamond run, which was
black diamond is the hardest run, right?
So it goes green for beginners. Blue for beginners, then green, then red, then black. Black diamond is for idiots and those who have got need an adrenaline. Yeah. I was an experienced skier and I'd done a few black runs, but I'd never done a black diamond run, and certainly nothing like this. Moguls are where the snow's been carved by the weather, and this was full of 6-foot moguls. And you had to ski on the top and sort of turn and slide down the mogul in order to turn, powder snow either side. So I skied the first third. I then had a fall. It took me about 20 minutes to get down to where they were each sitting on a mogul, rather like an elf sitting on a mushroom.
Right.
Took my skis off and was talking to them, and then suddenly the mogul gave way. I rotated out. There was nowhere to land, and I'm told I fell about 200 feet. The last thing I remember is a scream, which apparently was me, and then I knocked myself out. The good thing is that with the 2 falls and the skiing, I was at the bottom of the black diamond run, and we were quite close to the hotel. And I didn't want the blood wagon, so with their help, I managed to get back to the hotel. As soon as we travelled back, my mum took one look at me and carted me off to A&E. I'd got a bad concussion and I'd trapped a nerve in my neck. And it took me about 3 weeks to get back to school. Wasn't right. I was wearing a surgical collar and just did school and bed, really. But we were due to go skiing with the borough ski party, and I was the deputy leader about 5 weeks later. And it was agreed that I could go because we had our own medic going with us. As the week went on, I was a bit more like Quasimodo. And finally, on the last day after we'd come back from the kids doing their medals, I said to my colleagues, I've got to go and lie down. And within a few minutes, I found I was paralyzed down one side. Now, the pupils were playing in the corridor. I didn't want to frighten them, so I just waited, and it ended up being the longest wait of my life. I think it was only a few minutes. But when they came back, all hell broke loose. I was carted off to hospital, and it took me till the end of May to get back to school. I wasn't right, but I did school and I did sleep. And then as I got to the end of the summer term, I thought, I've got 6 weeks. I can really rest and recuperate.
Yeah.
Wasn't to be. 8 days in, very early in the morning, about 5:30, 6 o'clock, I got a phone call from my head teacher's wife saying she'd just found him in bed. He'd died in his sleep overnight. So far from it being the quiet recuperation, I had to let staff, the authority, parents know I was acting head, helped her plan the funeral, and I had to prepare for the term without him. In those days, the incumbent deputy wasn't allowed to apply, and I'd only been a deputy for a year. In fact, a third of that year I'd been off, but they didn't appoint, and I was invited to apply in the December, and I was appointed to be the permanent head of the school in the January. And I ran that school for just over 20 years, and I ran the school for the most part from a wheelchair as my mobility deteriorated, and I had 2 lots of failed back surgery and was completely wheelchair bound for long periods of time. Now, the school had a terrible budget, and so I wanted more special needs, and I wanted to be up to date with technology. And so I used to go out and do a whole range of roles outside school, not all at the same time, and 20 years is a long time. So I worked for the National College of Leadership in terms of coaching and training, did the same for the London Institute, was a workforce reform advisor for the government, an Ofsted inspector, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Not only brought an income into school, but also kept the school at cutting edge. The school was incredibly successful. We had lots of accolades, including being on the best 100 schools in the country list twice during my tenure. Although I did these jobs, most of certainly the preparatory work, anything but the face-to-face work I did in my own time. So I was doing anything between a 16 and 18-hour day, 5.5 days a week.
Take me back to that decision, right? So you've gone through this health challenge. You've had this challenge at work. They say, would you like this extra responsibility? When you were thinking about taking that on, what were you thinking about in terms of the pros and the cons, and what made you decide, right, I'm going for it?
The decision was made long before that, because when I became head, and remember, I was already being challenged by the after effects of the accident, and then they were still looking for why was I not getting better, and every time they did a test or tried a treatment, the body fell apart more. And so, for example, on one occasion I was in hospital for 4 months following an experimental drug therapy. But I made this decision really when I applied for the job, that I wasn't going to let my limitations get in the way of the school being successful. And so, having made that decision, and I've got a very strong work ethic, which I was brought up with, it was very much, if I wasn't in hospital, I was at school. And I was going to do whatever was required in order to make sure that the children and the staff had the best opportunity. And the interesting thing is, having made that conscious decision, I didn't have to make any more conscious decisions about it. It was a done deal.
Because you'd committed to it, right?
So when I did the first external job, and I can't even remember which one it was, I was very successful. All of the others came by invitation pretty well. And then the other thing is, our budget was appalling, and I was determined that we would have these things. And I enjoyed doing it, and it kept the school at cutting edge. But I think for me, the big thing is that the gift of my disability, and there was a huge gift in that, may not have felt like that, at times, quite a lot of times, but I couldn't physically get into most of the classrooms.
Okay.
So I had to find a way of enabling people to develop as leaders. And in order to do that, I developed a thing based on people taking radical responsibility. Now, that was highly successful and has been the basis of all of the work that I've done thereafter.
That's such an interesting point, because it's something we talk about in our business, but it's also something that I think about in life, because there is an element of all of us turning around and going, if it's our life, actually turning around and saying, well, I can't do that because of the external factors, is often a reason why we don't do it, but not a particularly good one, because actually, if you took ownership of it, you'd be then turning around and going, how do I do it despite the external circumstances versus, so what do you think of that as a concept? Do you think?
Well, I think that's absolutely, it's one half of the coin, if you like. That most of the time, when we don't step out of our comfort zone, it's because we believe that there's an external factor that's getting in the way. The reality is, the other half of the coin is that we self-limit all the time. And I'll tell you, for me, bearing in mind, I ran a school, I did all of these external roles, mostly from a wheelchair. Most people would say to me, well, you're not self-limiting. But after I left headship, and I was 51 when I left headship. No, I was 52 because I'd had a birthday. 52. I went and I did a lot more learning. I became a neuro-linguistic programming NLP master practitioner, NLP coach. And I wanted to see NLP used by other people. Sorry about that noise. I've got 2 kittens who've just suddenly started to go potty. I went to see Tony Robbins at the Excel Centre. Now, I was very cynical. I thought, big American bloke, lots of hype. And on that first morning, he was talking about a course he was running in California, and I really fancied it, but I dismissed it. Despite the fact that I travelled around the country doing all of these external roles, when I did those, I had the same taxi driver pick me up from home, drive me to Sheffield or wherever, wait for me and bring me back. I didn't have an electric travel chair, which I have now, and I dismissed it. How would I cope with that? In the evening of the first day, we did the fire walk, and that's when you walk over hot coals, about 25, 30 feet. And if you're in the right mindset, you don't get burnt. And I was determined to do that, although I'd had an internal spinal stimulator fitted by this time, and I could walk very few steps unaided, but I could walk that sort of distance with holding me both sides. And so I did the firewalk, and I was absolutely chuffed to little mint balls, sat back down in my wheelchair, and the guy behind me was a double amputee. He had no legs below the knee. He turned himself up onto his hands and walked those hot coals on his hands.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I recognized that I was self-limiting. I bought my ticket. I bought my flight. I went off and did the program. In fact, I did all Anthony's Robbins programs. I became a senior leader for him. Since then, I've traveled the world for pleasure and for work, and I don't give it a second thought. That guy taught me that however much you may think you are not self-limiting, the chances are you are.
That's so interesting. And actually, you see people in circumstances that are entirely different from yours and go, if they can do it, so can I, probably, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I love that. So tell me about one question about the teaching. You did all these external roles, and that kept you learning, developing, and growing, and bringing that back to the team at school. What was the big thing you learned from? What was the external role you did that was most educational? What did you learn the most from, and what did you?
I choose 2 because they taught me very different things. So the workforce reform work, I worked with all of the different key stages. So keys, infant, junior, secondary.
Yeah.
I also worked with special schools. And so I had more than ever a real holistic view of how each of these building blocks interconnects, and actually how often they weren't interconnecting. And as a result, kids were held back because secondary schools thought, we'll start from scratch. And there were kids who
okay, yeah.
So it gave me an overview. It also it made me think about how do we look at things holistically, which is something I developed later. Becoming an Ofsted inspector was a really great lesson in how do you set criteria and the importance of the criteria that you do set and whether it's actually serving the purpose that you want. And then how do you measure things against those criteria in a humane way? And the days that I did Ofsted, it changed later on. A big part of what you did was developmental work with schools to say, this isn't good enough, but have you thought about and supporting?
Gotcha.
And that's been incredibly useful when I've gone into businesses, because I started my own business in 2005, and I've worked with many businesses, and it gave me a real insight to go into those businesses and see, right, what's working, what's not, how do we move things forward? And so I'm eternally grateful. As I say, all of them I learned something, but those 2 particularly, I think, gave me a very different view.
here's the interesting thing, and the holistic point you raise is an insightful one, because I've got two girls, they're sort of teenagers, and I've got an adult daughter now who's 21, and I've never taught in a school. I've never been an educator, so I'm only looking at this from the outside. But the interesting thing for me is I wonder whether schools equip kids for the society they're going to live in tomorrow, or whether actually because education is such a big ship, making change to prepare them for life. And one of the things that I look at is life skills, right? You know, the ability to communicate and the ability to build relationships and the ability to sell, to market, to do all the things that might be useful. So what do you think, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you'd change about education so kids were...
I don't think education is education anymore.
Interesting.
I think it's an examination system.
Yeah.
Children, there's little room for critical thinking, for solution finding, for creativity, for them to grow. So I was very lucky in the sense that when I first started teaching, when I was first ahead, there was no national curriculum. I'm not against the national curriculum, incidentally. However, I am against funneling children into very, very narrow curriculums that's more about the exam than it is about education. So I'll give you an example. I was very fortunate. In my school, we had 60 clubs and activities run by staff, teaching and non-teaching. We had animals at school. We had a nature reserve, a garden, 2 choirs, an orchestra, every sport you could think of, chess, art, drama. And so we found whatever that young person was interested in, and through that developed their confidence, their self-worth, a lot of the life skills that you're talking about. And teachers are beleaguered at the moment with paperwork. Now, that was beginning, and I did quite a lot in my school to protect my staff. I know of friends who were teachers who, you know, they'd replan the curriculum and then there'd be a change and they'd replan and then they'd replan. And so, but we didn't. And what we did is we refined. As far as I know, we were the only school that when they brought in the literacy hour, we had formal disapplication from it, because we just had an Ofsted inspection that talked about our teaching of English was exemplary. We taught with whole books. We had kids in who were, you know, who could spout Shakespeare at you and who were really interrogating novels in terms of characterization and so on. But when it first came in, the literacy hour was all about worksheets and excerpts, and so it didn't have anything.
It's that box, isn't it? It's that had we test that box instead of thinking in a different. It's so interesting.
How do we get kids to think,
critically think, and communicate?
So I went back to the borough and said, look, we've just had an inspection. It says that what we're doing is exemplary. Come in, inspect us again. If you think that what you're telling us we're supposed to do is better,
it's going to enhance that.
And that, so I had a piece of paper which said, I've given you disapplication. 3 years later, they scrapped what they were doing and they came back to much more to what we were doing. But 3 years of damage done to young people and to the staff who hated it in other schools. The other thing I think that for me that made the difference is that we did things like, last week of term before kids left, they went on a trip to Chessington. So we said to the children, it's not educational, it's a treat, but you're going to raise the money and you're going to set up mini enterprises from to the summer, and you've got to raise the money for the coach and for the entry fee. And so they learn how to set these things up, how to coordinate, how to communicate, with lots of opportunities to do things that made them think outside the box, which if you look at them, they were all life skills. I mean, for example, a year group did a project around the human body, and each group took a body system. And one of my memories is of a group of boys doing the reproductive system. Hilarious. And they each had to teach it to the rest of the year group. And so because there were 4 classes across the year group, they had 4 different takes on each.
That's a chance giving boys that job, Gina. I mean,
well, I tell you that we actually had them doing a role play of having a baby. It was
brilliant.
to a song that they had written themselves. Nobody in that room is ever going to forget the reproductive system of the human body. But that's, I think, I wonder these days, what are kids going to remember about their school days? Are they going to remember all of the things that they did that were not strictly the curriculum, but learning about the curriculum in a creative and interesting way?
And to be fair to teachers, it's a I've got massive amounts of respect for the work they do, because actually it's a job that is made more difficult often by the systems, but we need teachers, passionate teachers, to do brilliant work, right?
I think teachers are having to teach with one hand behind their back. I think that it's difficult because of things like social media. There was the beginning, but I left in 2004, and life has changed since then, and I have every admiration for them. But the last year I was a head teacher, we had 468 statutory changes. Nobody can keep up with that.
No, exactly.
It's an impossibility.
So you left teaching, and then what happened? Tell me a little bit about that change.
So I was told by my neurologist, if you carry on what you're doing, I was having all sorts of bits drop off, you will be housebound and unable to drive in 18 months. And so I took the very difficult decision that I would retire and then thought, what the hell am I going to do? I've got all this experience, all this expertise. I've got a very low boredom threshold. And so I decided to create a research project across businesses. By this time, we'd been a beacon school. I'd worked with hundreds of teachers and dozens of other schools, sharing with them my approach to the development of leadership and potential. And so I did a research across industry, manufacturing, retail, health, financial insurance, manufacturing, to see were they facing the same problems with emerging leaders and developing their senior leaders. Of course they were. So I wrote my first 2 books. And in the first instance, I mainly worked with corporates, which I did from 2006 till the recession 2008-9. And then on the first week in January, if you remember, they were walking out of their banks.
Lehman Brothers, they were walking out of Canary Wharf, wasn't they?
I had a whole year's contracts waiting, and within 1 week, the whole of the year's contracts disappeared. By this time, I was doing some consultancy work for Essex University Business School. So I worked, and they would sometimes bring lots of different organizations would send 1 or 2 people, and so I'd do it in-house, or they would commission me to go and work with an SME, and I'd go out and do some training or some development or some consultancy work. Always invited back, and usually for things that could be avoided. And so I approached them and said, look, how about I work with you on a more consistent basis? And that became the new iteration for my business. And so I started working with businesses, anything up to a 10 million turnover, up to 250 staff. And that was the model really until the pandemic. And I would go in, and every organization that I worked with for more than 9 months became significantly more profitable, but holistically. Yes, they made a lot more money, but they made a lot more money because they were better
leaders, better people,
better communication. Staff had ownership, were more motivated, higher levels of productivity, better mental health, less people off sick. People stayed because they really were enjoying it. And I was using exactly the same model that I developed in school.
Yeah.
But I had a sense that I felt that the quality of leadership had deteriorated because people were so focused on profits.
Yeah.
And so I started my other business, Genuinely You, to be online, to reach people globally. I had 10 Facebook followers and about 20 LinkedIn when I started this. I'd never created a video. I had no idea. I'm not very technical. And so I started a new journey of learning
those skills. Yeah, true.
out of my comfort zone pretty well all of the time. I've now got something like 27,000 people on LinkedIn, a few thousand on Facebook. Not only was it important for me to actually spread the word around, because the people I was meeting in terms of coaching one-on-one and working with businesses, stress was continuing to rise, mental health was continuing to deteriorate, and I believed that there was a better way. And so, I have a mission to reach as many leaders as I can, but I also work on the principle that we all have to lead ourselves first.
True. And that's what I want to explore. So you talk about, Gina, taking control and being a leader in your own life. What does that practically mean? And how do we think about the first step we might want to take, particularly when we're going through change in our life, to become a leader in our own lives and make positive change?
So I believe that we have to take radical responsibility for our thoughts and the quality of our thoughts. If you want a better quality life, think better quality thoughts. And that's based on our beliefs. And those are installed very early. And our beliefs about ourselves rule our emotions, our actions, and our words. So, for example, my belief before I saw that guy do the firewalk is I'd never cope in America on my own. He shifted. There was a paradigm shift. My belief from I can't even think about that to if he can do that, so can I.
But often it takes that jump to new experiences, doesn't it? So you need to take yourself out of the comfort zone a bit to have the experiences that inform your worldview. So
yes and no.
Okay.
So, yes, often there is something new in our lives that makes us rethink, whether that's a new job or being made redundant. It can often be that the universe is trying to give us a sign and sort of gives us a poke and then kicks us up the bottom. And then finally, when we don't listen, it's a piece of 4x4 round the head. And so there's often a catalyst like that. However, that catalyst could just as easily be reading a book, listening to this podcast. I've shared that story that I shared with you and your listeners many times, and I've had lots of feedback where people have said, I heard that and it made me realize that I
think it's interesting. I know you do a lot of this. I was out with friends Saturday, and I was one of my friends was going through a bit of a struggle, and I said, look, I've got this book at home. I'm going to send it to you. Just give it a read. No obligation. See what you think. Because I actually think there's a real opportunity to just have incremental positive impacts by sharing ideas in people's lives. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely true. If you think about it, it's the basis for all development.
Yeah.
If we didn't have that, then we'd still be living in caves.
Yeah. With your amazing cat that's just showed how athletic they are. That was brilliant, that jump.
Well, there's another one about to jump. I should have shut them out, but I haven't.
So here's what I'm curious about. You've gone, this podcast and this YouTube channel is all about helping people manage change and go through positive change in their life when they're thinking about moving from one chapter of their life to another. It sounds like you've gone through quite a few chapters. What has that taught you about managing change, making positive change, and coping with the challenges that often that change brings?
So the first principle I think that we need to recognize is there are 3 constants in life. If you listen two of them from Mr. McCorber. One was death, one was taxes, and the other is change. We actually are changing from the moment we're conceived until the moment we die. But people are find change challenging because I think I've thought a lot about this, and I think what people find most challenging is uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so we fight against uncertainty rather than embrace it.
Yeah.
And so instead of thinking this is an opportunity, people close that down and think this is scary. Now, was it Louisa Hayes said, feel the fear and do it anyway. Fear and that anticipation that gives you the best performance are exactly the same physiological change within the body. It's the story we create.
Yeah.
So I've worked with a lot of people in transition, whether that's transition because they've been made redundant, or they're ready for the next promotion, or they are grieving having lost somebody.
Yeah.
Change is challenging.
Yeah.
But I believe it's in the challenge that we grow. If everything went along on an even keel, we would grow less than we do when it's challenging. And I'm the first to say I would quite like to have learned all of the things I've learned. Give me a raspberry pill and I've learned it. But life doesn't happen that way.
No.
But I think that when you start to recognize that life is happening for us, not to us, if we choose to embrace uncertainty and be curious.
Yeah.
And it's when
curiosity, I think. Yeah.
Doors open. And I think there's quite a good analogy. Most people are living in the equivalent of a goldfish bowl. It's very little. We stay within the parameters of that goldfish bowl. Yeah. And that's our comfort blanket. Or I think our familiarity zone. It's what we know.
Yeah.
Many people then think, I feel contained by this, or something happens and they know they've got to change. So they jump into a fish tank. It's bigger, but in the reality, it's still very contained. When you're open to jumping into the ocean and swimming without having to know where you're going and what time it's going to happen and where things are, those opportunities really present themselves. And so the taking radical responsibility for yourself is asking yourself, how much am I self-limiting? And we all do it. And even now I catch myself and think, come on, this is not, this is an opportunity. I know it feels uncomfortable, but get over it.
Through the work that you do with people, helping them navigate change, what's the self-limiting belief that comes up time and time and time again?
The most overriding one is I'm not good enough. Self-worth. I'm too old. Too old is a really interesting one. I'm 72, and I took over being the vice chair of a charity. I have to tell you, I'm back out of my comfort zone the whole time, learning new things. So ultimately, I think that when we look at our lives and look at what is it that's guiding us, so the self-worth, do you believe that you're too old, too young, too fat, too thin, not clever enough, not rich enough, not enough?
Yeah.
And then the next layer is that people are either frightened of failure, so they don't try, or they're frightened of success. And so as soon as they get close to success, they self-sabotage.
Yeah, it's interesting.
People flop from one to the other and get the best of both, or the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Tell me a little bit. So you're 72.
Yeah.
And you're not doing 18 hours a day, I'm assuming now. So not working as hard as you like hours wise, but you're still engaged and excited about work.
Right. I'm going to challenge your thinking, because when we did the Charity with Fat Images UK campaign, which is about revolutionizing the care system and beyond, we put on a summit in April this year And I was back to doing an 18-hour day for
Okay.
weeks.
Okay.
And it was because we'd been let down. Somebody had promised to sponsor us, and then 10 weeks before pulled out.
Right.
And so where we were going to
Yeah,
employ a team, the team
Yeah.
was me. But I think once you are a workaholic, and I was a workaholic because it was great pain control, I have to constantly remind myself.
Yeah.
And
But the thing is, as you said earlier, yes, temporarily you're doubling down on getting things done, getting something achieved, but that 18-hour day is just not sustainable for the longer term.
It's
It's
stupid.
just like, yeah.
And recognized how stupid it was, but ultimately everything was booked, and either filled the gap that had been left, or the whole thing fell apart, and
exactly.
wasn't prepared to let that happen.
But that's more about your commitment and responsibility to other people, isn't it? It's not about the work, it's about the fact that you want to make sure that this project with Fatima is a big success, and I'm going to promote that later. But at 72, you're not turning around and going, work's over, I'm now older, I'm now retired, I'm now doing that. And a lot of the conversations we have with clients are all about the fact that works potentially gives us so much in our lives that we can continue if we want to. We've got a choice to if we want to. So tell me what work gives you in that balance, that mix of well-being in your life, and why at 72 and beyond you're choosing to carry on, and why you think it might be good for others.
I think having a strong sense of purpose is important.
Yeah.
The what gets you up in the morning, and I've worked with a lot of people who've taken retirement, and they for the first year or so, their ladies what lunch, or they go and play golf, or they've done all of the do-it-yourself in the house, or and then say, is this it?
Yeah.
And for me, if you look at all of your, and I'm not talking about necessarily very specific expertises in terms of your business, but look at your life experience, look at what you've learned. And I encourage people to go and do some voluntary work, mentor young people, go and help at the animal shelter, go and do
you become a trustee, do that.
And so it's important at so many levels. Now, I'm not saying it's right for everybody. And if you're somebody who your life is fulfilling, and that's fulfilling watching the telly and going out for the occasional lunch, great. Congratulations. However, if you think about getting older, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's your mobility, that's your mental capacity. They know that people suffering from dementia, it's not always the case, and I must say that, but if you are lonely, if you don't have social interaction, if your mind is not challenged,
you've got to maintain that intellectual challenge as well, haven't you?
You are more likely to suffer depression, to suffer from not maybe Alzheimer's, but ultimately you lose that edge. And I think that those people who stay interested in the world in whatever format that is, who go in, my dad used to say, if you're feeling a bit down or you're feeling a bit umpty, go and do something useful, because that fills your batteries. And I think that's as true for older people. So if your mobility, and nobody can turn around to me and say, yeah, but I'm not mobile. Well, you can be a befriender on the telephone. There is something there for everyone. And it's not a one size fits all. And I've had lots of people say, but I don't know what I want to do, or I don't know what my purpose is. And I say, live a life with purpose, intentionally.
So
and give yourself the opportunity to be curious about what really floats your boat.
Well, I think there's a concept in a brilliant book by a guy called Bill Burnett that we talk about what happens next on What Happens Next all the time, called rapid low-cost experimentation. If you're not sure what you want to do, just try some stuff. And you either win or you learn. you work out that it's the thing for you and you want to do a bit more of, or you realize that that's not the thing and you can discount it. But the opportunity to just try stuff so that you can incrementally build a life that you want to live, I think is really good, because it
very powerful.
when we talk about purpose, we often think of it as this grand thing that we're going to find one day. And in actual fact, most of us find purpose incrementally just through having life experiences, right? So that element is interesting. Now, one of the concepts when I was doing the research for this interview, Gina, that I wanted to really explore is survival and thriving. Okay. So how do we get from a life where we're just going through the motions, we're just surviving, to a life full of thriving? And what's the first step somebody can take to?
First step is always the work you do on yourself.
Yeah.
Always, always, always. So, and I've got a free blueprint that people can use to almost do an audit of that. Okay. And they can just email me and put blueprint in there, happily send that to them. Think about you. And very often, even when people are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, when I say to them, when you consider whether you're going to do something or not, whose permission are you seeking? Is it your mum and dad's? Is it your partner's? Is it society's? Or is it yours? Because ultimately, when you get to the time that you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, give yourself permission to be you authentically and not trying to please. I'm not saying going out of your way to displease everybody, but not trying to live a life that you think that other people want.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, though, our parents have conditioned us. And I was, talking to somebody not long ago, incredibly creative, but parents have said, no, you've got to get a proper job.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
In her just 60, has taken up her art again, has now got a growing business selling cards to local shops and things. Now starting to run monthly art workshops, finally living who she is.
Love that.
She looks 15 years younger. She's just thriving, where before her life was okay, but it was going through the motions and surviving rather than doing something that she is passionate about and loves.
Well, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? It's that element of success for all of us is individually defined.
Absolutely.
And actually, we often, and I've been guilty of it as well, play the game of what our mum and dad have told us what success looks like. And, Gina, I'm really lucky that I've got a brilliant family, lovely life, and get to all this sort of stuff. And in part, that's down to, as you said about your mum, the values and morals that are passed down. That's important to me as well. But actually looking in the mirror and going, what do I really want? And what does success look like to me, as opposed to parents or society, I think is an important question.
And if you think about it, we live our life, we go to school, either you go straight out to work or you go to college or university, and then you start your adult professional life, whatever that is. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily deemed one of the professions, but you're working. You then, most people have a family. The constraints are significant, and many people feel trapped. I can't give up this high-paid job, or I can't give up my 3 jobs because I've got to pay the rent. And so the things that they really enjoy get pushed onto the back burner. And I think part of that is that we then have a belief that there's no way we can do the things we enjoy. And many people think it's got to be all or nothing. And I would say, actually, that's not the case. There's always an opportunity to do something of those and build it from that, rather than give everything up in order to do something different.
I mean, I've got 2 thoughts on that. Number one, I love the idea of a portfolio life. For a lot of my clients and many people I speak to, their particularly later in their life, their identities exploded because it's, well, actually, I've got the time and the headspace now to pick and choose the elements that I really want to do.
Can I just come in there, because I think you brought up a really important point.
Yeah.
When I left headship, and bearing in mind I've been highly successful, I was back to being 14 and, you know, a teenager with who am I when I'm not being a head teacher? And so much of our identity is tied up with what we do for our job, that I think that's another reason why it's so important to work on yourself and recognize you are not your job. Your identity as an authentic human being is much more than that, and you'll never lose what you've learned, but now is the time to actually unwrap that and see who you're being when you're being authentically you.
I mean, I had a conversation quite recently, and I've talked about this and what happens next all the time, with a client of mine who has got enough money, never going to need to worry about money again, based on the plan that we've built. And when I ask him about works, he says to me, the bit that worries me is, what am I if I'm not that?
Yeah.
And I think that's the right question. And doing the internal work that lets you get to a point where you go, well, I'm not a job, but I could be this, and this is a journey we need to
start. I think it's important to say, you know, I work with a lot of people to help them navigate that. And sometimes it's quite hard to do it by yourself because you can't see the wood for the trees. You don't see the on. And so I would say, if you're in that situation, you're struggling, reach out, because we have somebody who's got an opportunity to help you step back and look in a safe way.
Well, it goes back to your point on the goldfish bowl, doesn't it? Sometimes we're restricted by our worldview and need that external challenge or external questioning to help us think about this. Now, on your when I was doing my research, I know that you talk about these 7 principles to live a happy life. And I realized that when I asked you the question, and I can spell, I spelled happy H-A-P-Y. Who does that, Gina? I mean, that was a bit weird. But the 7 principles for a happy life, tell me about those, because when we talk about what happens next, we talk about well-being across our lives as opposed to just in money and just in work. So tell me a little bit about those 7 principles and where you think we should focus on to improve our well-being.
I think the first thing I would say is that happiness is a choice. Everything we do in life or not is a choice. And what many people do is that they put so many criteria in the way, hurdles, if you like. So in order to be happy, I've got to have the perfect partner who never nags me. I've got to have the perfect house, the perfect car, the perfect job. Kids who do well at school never need to be nagged to tidy their bedrooms. And we, before we're prepared to be happy, all of those things have got to be in place.
Yeah. But everything you talked about there was external, wasn't it? And I like the Stoic philosophy of focusing on what you can control, and actually that's you. That's your thoughts about the world, and that's what you tell yourself. Yeah, interesting.
So if you change that to, I'm going to make it easy to feel happy or grateful. Grateful is a really great place to start. And so I'll be happy when I get up and there's hot water, or I can have a nice cup of tea, or my cats make me laugh, or the phone rings and it's a friend. I'll choose in that moment to be happy. And the other things, they're not my measure of happiness. Interestingly, the research done shows that people who live in quite primitive societies where there's a real sense of community score much happier on the happiness scale than people in the Western world.
Well, so I was in the Amazon rainforest last year. I spent some time with a community in the Amazon rainforest. And what was interesting is the kids had no technology there. There was one laptop because they do ecotourism and things like that. But there was one laptop between about 400 people. the kids, we bought the kids some colouring books and a couple of balls. And I was mucking about with them. I was grabbing the ball and then running, and then, like, these kids were chasing me down the, through the outcrop. And it was really funny. But the laughter on something so simple made you really connect to that element of, that the resources they've got are different because the jungle provides for their food and shelter and, construction and whatever it needs to be. But that sense of community they've got is really interesting. And actually, I think there's a lot to learn from that.
I think that's pretty fundamental. The other thing is that I think comparatinitis is a Western world virus that is more deadly than Ebola.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Particularly those who are on social media are comparing themselves with something that is not real.
Of course.
Because people only show the best bits and they put themselves through filters and all of those things. And so we are setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think recognizing that everything that we do is a choice, even not choosing is a choice. And when we don't choose actively, often that's when the most damage is done. We let things drift. But I think that, recognizing that our perspective becomes our reality. Change the perspective, you change the reality. So an example that I use, if you think about two people in a park, both had very different experiences with a dog. One has been bitten as a child, very frightened of dogs. The other's always had dogs and loves them. Dog comes near to them, same dog. One person sees the dog, sees threat, then gets all silly and starts to go, oh, go away. Dog growls. Other person knows how to greet a dog, sees the dog as a friend, reacts very differently. Their beliefs, their perspective and beliefs are reinforced.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
But how often is our perspective that we will see a slight from someone when the reality is that their motive has not been the same? So you're walking down the street, somebody you know well, you wave and say, ooh, and they ignore you. There'll be many people who say, well, what's up with them? Oh, that's not the way to treat me. And the whole day they'll be mithering about the fact that that person has ignored them.
Yeah.
When the reality most likely is that they've got something on their mind and that they're just wrapped up in what's going on in their own heads.
Yeah, 100%.
So our perspective is really important. If you change the perspective, you change the reality.
I love that.
So being happy is about when somebody does something to upset you, the question to ask is, has this been deliberately done? Has somebody gone out of their way to do that? Or am I just collateral damage because they're wrapped up in what they're doing?
I mean, the answer is we don't know.
No.
But we jump to a conclusion that either serves us or doesn't, right? No. And actually picking the one that serves you is often the interesting one. What?
But then your reaction is likely to be different. If your perception is, well, they're wrapped up, you could then pick up the phone and say, Chris, sorry this morning you ignored me. Is everything okay?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's true. It allows you to frame it in a perspective that shows care and love as opposed to something else. Gina, we didn't even answer half of the questions I wanted to ask you today. So at some point, we're going to have you back and do
my pleasure. Be my pleasure.
But I've loved our chat today, and certainly I hope if you're watching or listening to this, you did too, because I think there's so many little gems that we've talked about that can help you navigate the next chapter of your life. Gina, if people want to find out a bit more about your work, and I'd love for you to mention the work you're doing from a charity perspective as well, because we want to give that a shout out. Tell everybody where they can find you, both from a professional side in terms of the work you do to help people, but also the charity work you do, please.
So you can find me on genuinely-you.com or on ginagardinerassociates.co.uk, both websites. You can find me on LinkedIn, Gina Gardiner, Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. I'm all over social media like a rash. I've got a leadership blueprint that you can have, email me, Gina@genuinely-you.com. Put blueprint in the title, and I'll happily send you a blueprint around leading yourself, leading others. And that's very much about doing the deep dive work. What I would say to everybody, you've got one life, make the most of it. You know, give yourself the gift of investing in yourself.
Love that. And I know you're doing a lot of work with
just to say, I have my own radio show. You can hear it. Go to Brushwood Media Network, the free app, and it's the show is Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. and repeated at 11 p.m.
And tell us a little bit about the work you do for charity.
So I met Fatima when we were both doing a keynote speech 2 years ago the week before last. And I gave her a lift to the station, Liverpool Street Station, because I use a wheelchair. London transport's not very helpful. And we started talking, and she was talking about the work that she was already doing in terms of bringing attention to the dire situation that many kids in care and care leavers experience. And then initially said, would I write a few letters? No problem. Then I want to set up a charity. Will you help me? And it's taken over a big part of my life. And so what we're doing is a range of levels that we are bringing people together, because they all work in silos. That's what the summit was about. And engaging with people to actually make fundamental change. At the moment, kids who are in care are often moved 10 or more times in a year. Fragments their education. They have to be independent at the age of 18. They get 2,000 or 3,000 in some authorities, 2 visits in the first year, told to get on with it. Within 2 years, a third of them are homeless. So if you're interested, if you're in the Brentwood area and travel to Brentwood, we've got an evening at Brentwood School on the 4th of November, where we're going to both share our stories and talk about the charity. And the tickets are available from Brentwood School. Come and join us. We'd love to see you there.
And I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be sharing that with my community as well. Gina, it's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you today. And if you're watching, I hope you have a brilliant day. Speak soon.
Thank you.